What are the strengths for Maryland football?
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, video content creator for 247 Sports and InsideMarylandSports.com, and host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you for making us part of your day. It's a really great day today. It's a Wednesday and just another day to talk about Maryland football and Maryland sports overall, and I'm excited for today's episode. I feel like we got some good stuff coming your way today, so let's get into it. I want to talk about Maryland football's strengths as a team. I don't want to talk about the weaknesses today. I want to be more positive after there was a comment left that I'm often negative about Maryland athletics and Maryland sports. And I think at times I do have a negative side to things and just negative opinions, just because I like to be honest. I like to share what's actually in my head. I don't like to just give out stuff that I think is and think that people want to hear. I want to give out what I actually think, and I want to be kind of optimistic about, or I don't always want to be optimistic about Maryland sports. I just want to give what I honestly think about things. But I do want to talk about Maryland football's strengths for this coming year, and I think the strengths this year are a lot different than the strengths last year for Maryland football. I think our first strength that I want to talk about on the offensive side of the ball maybe could lead our offense this year. I'm not exactly sure what our offense looks like. How does it change with Talia? But I think the strength right now is in our running back room. I think Roman Hemby is one of the best backs in the Big Ten, and I don't know if he's going to get enough credit going into the year. I don't know if he's going to get enough allocates after the year, but this guy should have a really good year for Maryland football. I think he was one of the best backs in the Big Ten 2 years ago, and I think he took a bit of a step back last year in terms of just his production overall, whether that's on him, whether that's offensive line, whatever that is. He took a step back last year, and we got to get him back to being at the top of the Big Ten, because if you guys remember, last year during the year, Mel Kiper had him as the number 2 running back on his big board, the number 2 running back. I forget who he had number 1 at that time. I want to say Blake Corum, but for the fact that Roman Hemby, the Maryland running back, was number 2 on Mel Kiper's board, shows that he believed that Roman Hemby had potential to go pretty high in the NFL draft, and that Roman Hemby has plenty of tools to contribute to the next level, but those tools also show up in college football, of course. And I think Roman Hemby, what he can do as a runner for Maryland football is a strength for our team. The way he runs, how hard he is, how hard he runs, just how good of a player overall he is. He also is really great in the passing game. If we can't get the run game going, you can get the screen game going to Roman Hemby. You can get him just coming out the backfield on a normal pass out in the flat to Roman Hemby. He can do all these different things. So I think Roman Hemby as a player is a strength in that running back room. But the running back room overall, I really like it this year. Colby McDonald was great last year in terms of running yards. He did exactly what he needed to do in terms of average yards per carry, was top of the country for a little bit, and he still ended up with being a really good number, but there was a point where he's averaging above 7 yards per carry, and I was like, he has to get more carries just because of how productive he is with it. And then I think Nolan Ray, the added threat of Nolan Ray, who didn't really play last year, but Nolan Ray has arrived, and I saw it in the Maryland spring game, and his explosiveness and his speed might be the best in that room. So I think overall that running back room is one of our biggest strengths. I put it in our top 3 or 4 strengths as a football team right now. Now, a lot of it's going to depend on, can the offensive line hold up? Can the offensive line block for that running back room? But right now, that running back room is absolutely a big-time strength for Maryland football, and I think it's one of the best strengths. I think our wide receiver room is a strength. I think the depth in the wide receiver room is a question mark, and I don't know what's going to happen and where we're going to get production from the guys down the roster a little bit when you start talking about our 3rd, 4th, 5th receivers. Guys that you still need to make the offense go a lot of the times. The more guys that can get receptions, the more guys that can get open, more guys that you can spread the ball out to, the better you usually have it on offense, and it's easier for the quarterback the more guys he's comfortable with. But I know that at the top of our wide receiver room, Ty Felton and Caden Prather are a strength of this football team, an absolute strength. Both guys, all conference type of players, all Big Ten type of guys. Both guys will have a chance, I think, to play at the next level. I think Ty Felton's got a little bit of special in him that it's like, I don't know if anybody knows how good that kid can be, because that kid has all the tools to be, I think, like a 4th round pick at least in the NFL draft. I think he has a chance to get drafted next year if he puts it all together this year. And I saw a Ty Felton last year that had developed and grown up and was one of the best receivers in the Big Ten. So you bring back one of the best receivers I saw with my eyes, and the statistics show you that he was one of the best wide receivers in the Big Ten. And he's a guy that could be looking to be in 1,000-yard receiver, and a lot of that could depend on the quarterback play. But I think in terms of returning wide receivers, I'm curious when the rankings come out, if sometimes people like to different analysts like to rank the top returning players at each position in the Big Ten or whatnot. And now that Oregon and Washington and UCLA and USC has some guys at wide receiver, specifically that comes to mind, USC and Oregon have some dudes at wide receiver for sure. And Lincoln Riley and Lanning do a really good job recruiting those guys. But I'm curious if Ty Felton comes in the top 5, top 10 for Big Ten wide receivers. I think he should. I think that he's one of the best in the Big Ten in terms of receiving talent. And then I think Caden Prather is also right there at the top. What he can do at his 6'4" frame and be able to go up and get the spectacular catch. I said it. I think those two guys should be our top-rated guys on EA Sports on the new college football game. But I also think they're the strength of our team. And I think that the passing game and those two guys are going to relieve a lot of pressure off of our quarterback room that right now I can't say is a strength of our team. I wouldn't put the quarterback room in that category or anything close to that category. But in terms of kind of like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 1 being a strength, tier 2 being it's in the middle, a lot's kind of to be seen, and tier 3 is like that looks like a weakness right now. I would say that the wide receiver room and the running back room is a strength right now. I would say the quarterback room is in tier 3, and it's still a lot to be questioned, and there's a lot of question marks surrounding that room, and we don't really know what's going to happen in that room. But I think that the running back room on offense and the wide receiver room with Hemby and Caden Prather is a strength. The tight end room, some might argue that it's a strength, but it's still inexperienced. I'd put it in tier 2 because I think that Dylan Wade and Preston Howard do have the chance to be special, but we still don't really know exactly when it comes to actual gameplay how well they will play in actual games. But I think those two strengths on the offense side of the ball, the running back room in the top of the wide receiver room, is our two strengths that I think we can rely on at the skill positions and I think are going to be really good players. Now, moving on to the defensive side of the ball, I would say there's two position groups that I would say are strengths. I'd say the defensive line unit is a big time strength for Maryland football this year. I don't think people are realizing how kind of good this defensive line unit should be for Maryland football. But players have to take a jump up. But I'm kind of basing it off of the fact that Maryland football doesn't really lose anybody up front. And whenever you don't lose anybody in college football, you should be pretty good at that position group. And Maryland football wasn't special on the defensive front last year, but we were solid at times. Different players stepped up at different times. But the fact that we don't really lose anybody up front and that most people are back in that room, you would think that the Maryland defensive line unit should be a pretty good unit in the Big Ten. And I have to say is a strength right now on our team, whether it's defensive end group with Callan Wyatt or Donnell Brown or Quayshawn Fuller or the inside defensive line group in terms of the defensive tackles, in terms of Jordan Phillips and Tamia King-Bisote, all really talented players. I think Jordan Phillips is one of our better players, to be honest, and has a chance to be an all-conference type of player. He's a humongous human being right in the middle of our defensive line, and he makes it hard to run the ball against. He can get He's good at creating pressure on the quarterback. And same thing with Tommy Aking-Basote. And our edge rushers on the outside are really coming along. And I think that another year for those guys in the Maryland system, in the weight room, in the college football, they have to be in a pretty good spot and should be looking to do some pretty good things for Maryland football. And I would consider that a tier 1 strength because of the amount of guys that we have coming back. And in the safety room, maybe I think my favorite position groups, like if I had to rank the strengths on our team, I think the safety group would be one with Dante Trader and Glendon Miller back there for Maryland football. Glendon Miller was really good last year, maybe the most underrated player in our football team, and he didn't play safety. He was playing the slot cornerback position, but what he did at slot corner was real. I thought he was one of our better players. He was able to force turnovers. He was able to deflect passes. He was able to stop the run at times. He was able to be a really versatile player, and now he gets to play back at safety where he's supposed to be his natural kind of position, and I think he's a really good player. And then, of course, Dante Trader looks like he's taking on that leadership role on Maryland football, and he's also one of our top players as well with all that he does. So I think our safety room is definitely one of our strengths as a team. I would say our cornerback room would lie in tier 3 in terms of there's still a lot that we're going to have to see with that cornerback room with basically, all new starters up there. And then you look at our linebacker room. I put our linebacker room in tier 2 because we lose Jayshawn Barham. And I don't know if there's a whole lot of special in that room. It just seems like a solid kind of room that's going to be able to get the job done next year, with there's nothing wrong with, but I just don't know if I would say that's like one of our strengths as a football team. But I think Dante Trader and Glendon Miller are as talented as it gets on that defense. And I think that also Brandon Jacobs, a young safety who I'll also be talking about in a second, is going to really help out Maryland football. Who are the building blocks for Maryland football? Who should we be building the program around? Who is the future of Maryland football? I will talk about that after this ad from eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships, and is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for, and with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. So I want to do a different kind of segment and talk about who I think are the building blocks for Maryland football. I don't think I've ever talked about this. I don't think I've ever done a segment like this. I mean, I've done similar type of things, just talking about recruiting and all of those different things. But I want to talk about who are the guys that we build this program around. Because if you think about it, a lot of the guys, a lot of the knowns are going to be gone next year, whether it's Dante Trader, whether it's Ruben Hippolyte at this point, whether it's Roman Hemby is getting up there, whether it's Ty Felton or Caden Prather, a lot of these guys are kind of going to be gone soon. And I'm looking at a new group of Maryland football players that are going to have to be the building blocks for Maryland football in the coming years. And I think there's some players that are going to be huge blocks in building this thing and continuing the success of Maryland football, hopefully continuing the success, and are going to be huge if we want to stay on this upward trajectory and getting better as a program and getting better overall. And continue this Coach Loxley era in the right way. And I think there's a couple players that I want to talk about that I think this program is going to be reliant on in the future and that are going to be building blocks for Maryland football. Starting off with the offensive side of the ball, MJ Morris is a building block for Maryland football. MJ Morris is probably going to be our new starter, but he still has a couple of years of eligibility. If this was his last year as a player, I wouldn't say that, but because he still has a couple more years of eligibility, I want to say that MJ Morris is a building block for Maryland football. I don't know how good MJ Morris is going to be this year. I've kind of had different opinions on him at times, and I kind of noticed that. At times I've been really high on him. At times I've been like, I'm not sure about him just because of different reports I've been hearing about in practice. But I do expect him to be the starter, and I think he's a really talented player. And so what he can do this year is going to be big, but what he can do in the future for Maryland football, as we lose Cy Felton and Caden Prather, as we lose some other players up front that aren't going to be there. And I'm going to be looking at MJ Morris to carry the offense potentially next year in year 2. I think he's a building block for Maryland football. And I think a lot of the program, maybe the biggest building block, a lot of the program is going to be how he is the next couple of years. So on the offense side of the ball, I think he's one of our biggest building blocks. Now, Nolan Ray, I touched on him a little bit today. I think Nolan Ray is another building block that I think is extremely important for Maryland football. I think that Nolan Ray, I think that I didn't really realize the type of athlete he was last year. I didn't realize because he didn't really get any touches. But now, after seeing him in the spring ball game and everybody talking about Nolan Ray, how he can bring a different dimension to Maryland football, I recognize his talent. And I say that when Roman Hemby's gone, which he will be eventually, Roman Hemby, it feels like Roman Hemby's been here for a while now, and he has. And when Roman Hemby's gone, we're going to be looking at Nolan Ray to be an impact player and to be a really high-level player for Maryland football down the road and to be the next kind of go-to running back, I think, for Maryland football, because Coley McDonald's up there in eligibility and Roman Hemby's up there in eligibility, and eventually those guys are going to be gone, and I'm going to be looking at Nolan Ray to be potentially next up and to be one of the biggest building blocks for Maryland football. And then in the receiver room's interesting because there's kind of guys in multiple classes that I kind of want to talk about. You could say the junior class has to be building blocks next year in terms of Octavian Smith and Shalik Knotts. Those guys are getting up there in age as well. And so I look at a guy like Ryan Manning, who was a freshman last year, who I think needs to be a really good player for Maryland football in the future, depending on how we use the portal and everything. And then as well as there's other players in that receiver room that I think are going to be important building blocks for Maryland football. I think of the freshman, Mekhi White. I think he is one of the more talented players in that receiver room. There's plenty of guys that could step up. There's plenty of young guys that could step up in that receiver room that could be the future of Maryland football. I'm just going to do the offensive side of the ball for today because it looks like we're kind of running out of time in the segment, and I don't mind pushing the segment to another day and continue to talk about other position groups, but I'm just going to do the offense side of the ball. And then the last two players I want to talk about, who when I think of building blocks, I really do think of these two guys, Preston Howard and Dylan Wade, the two tight ends that both are relatively young that have a chance to be the future of Maryland football. When I think of building blocks, I'll say it again. I think of these two guys. These two guys come to mind because I've been hearing amazing things about Dylan Wade. And if he really shows that in the real games, he might already be an impact player, but he's also going to be a building block down the road for Maryland football. He could be the next star. I talked about it. For Maryland football, and so can Preston Howard. And so when I think of guys that the future of Maryland football can lean on the offense side of the ball, and MJ Morris can really have a good rapport with, I think of Dylan Wade and Preston Howard, and those two guys being really good top-end building block types of players for Maryland football. The offensive line's weird because a lot of the guys up front are just up high are just upperclassmen. So you kind of have to wait to see. It seems like every year there's 5 new seniors starting on the offensive line. So I kind of have to wait to see. I really do like Ryan Howerton, and I love Tamaris Walker, who I know personally. And there's a lot of guys and a lot of players up there that are going to be looking to make their impact down the road. But you kind of just got to see how those guys develop. That's why I didn't name really anybody up front. But we'll see what happens with those guys. Because if we got Jordan Seaton, if you guys remember the whole Jordan Seaton situation, that would have been a thing where I would have been like, yeah, he's a building block for Maryland football. He might have came in and started right away, but since we don't have a guy like that, I'm still kind of figuring out who our building blocks are up front for Maryland football. So Maryland has a new game time for their game against Northwestern football. I will talk about that right now. So Maryland announced that they will be playing Northwestern football on a Friday night. It was originally scheduled to play on a Saturday, but now it's moved to Friday night lights for Maryland football, which could be really interesting. Friday, October 11th, they will be playing Northwestern at 8 p.m. and air on Fox. And I think this game could be really interesting for different reasons. I did want to talk about this because I think it's kind of important. I think it's news that you guys care about that our game got moved to a Friday, even though it's kind of a ways away. And I think in the game against Virginia last year, in terms of a Friday night game, and I really enjoyed that because I got to watch Maryland football on a Friday, and it felt like a good vibe. It felt like the players enjoyed playing on a Friday. It feels a little bit different because usually Maryland won't have like a primetime game during the year in terms of we won't be playing at 8 o'clock. Like we won't be playing one of those types of games that you kind of think of. The big time programs will be in that slots, whether it's some of these SEC schools, Bama, LSU, whatever it is, or if it's like an Ohio State or whatever. But a lot of the Big Ten games in the past have been on big noon kickoff. But I don't know. I guess it's a little bit different this year. I don't know exactly how it's going to work. But my point is that Maryland football doesn't usually get to play on the prime time type of games. And when I think of prime time, I think more of the NFL, but it does apply to college football at times. We don't usually get those standalone-ish type of games where it's really just us playing and people around the country, guys that don't have much to do, might be honestly just watching Maryland football. And I don't want to say the world's watching, but a larger majority of people are definitely watching your game when you're not playing at 12 o'clock the same time as when Ohio State's playing USC. I just made that up, but and you know what I mean? When there's other great games, when Bama's playing LSU at 3 o'clock, and that's the time that our game is, and there's just more eyes on the program, and I think that that's important for Maryland football sometimes, just to get more recognition, just for more people to get eyeballs on it, for more people to talk about it, because people don't usually talk about Maryland football a lot, and it doesn't get the respect that it always deserves. And people think of it as a basketball school at times, even though I would say our football team was much better than our basketball team last year. But still, it never gets quite the respect that you would think that it should get sometimes. But I think that it's important for Maryland football to receive some of that respect. And I also think that this Northwestern game is really interesting. Northwestern had a first-year coach because that one Big Ten Coach of the Year. And the interesting thing about it was the Northwestern program was kind of in the dumps last year at the beginning of the season because there was a whole thing going on with their head coach, and he gets fired, and they have a new assistant, and a bunch of recruits decommit. The assistant becomes the head coach, and he's the interim, but he ends up doing a really good job in leading that Northwestern team to a bowl game and having a really solid record. They beat us. I didn't think that Northwestern team should have beaten us, but the fact that we get to play this kind of newly renovated Northwestern team that sounds like they've gotten their rhythm as a program, sounds like they're in a much better spot as a program, I think that has a chance to be a really cool Friday night game, and I think it's an important game for the Terps. It's not one – Northwestern's not a school that you want to drop to twice in a row, and I don't think we should, but I think Northwestern's better now, and I think a lot of people respect it a lot more just because of their new coach who actually got ranked above Coach Loxley in the rankings that one of these journalists wrote about Maryland, or not Maryland football, but the Big Ten coaching and their rankings. And I thought that Coach Loxley should have been ranked above the Northwestern coach. I said 1 year, good year from the Northwestern coach doesn't make him a better coach than Coach Loxley. And so I'm not saying there's like a backstory to this Northwestern game, but I do think it's important now that it's a standalone game. More people will be watching on a Friday night. I know a lot of people do different things on Friday nights, but I think that people who have the TV on, don't have a lot to do, will be watching. And then also you don't want to lose to Northwestern twice. So I think it's an interesting game. It's right before a pretty tough stretch for Maryland football where we have Minnesota and we have USC. And so it'll be interesting to watch that game against Northwestern. That's all we have for today. Thank you for listening to Locked On Terps. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're here every day talking Maryland football and basketball. So thank you for listening to Locked On Terps.